but a new era was dawning. At the start of the 19th century, Powys Castle passed into the hands of the Clive family, who had married into the Herberts. Robert Clive was one of the most important figures in the history of the British Empire. A statesman and general who established military supremacy in India and the foundations of the British Empire. At the age of 16, Powys was inherited by Edward Clive, after the estate had been managed by his father. And it was his father who not only brought great wealth to Powys after his time as governor of Madras, but also what may in fact be the castle's greatest treasure, the mementos of Clive's amazing deeds in India.
Well, when Clive was in India, he was obviously fascinated by the life that surrounded him, genuinely interested, and did acquire a number of objects. Some of these objects may have been given to him as part of his relationship with the various princes that he was coming across. His son, Edward Clive, who also was in India as governor of Madras much later in the 1790s, was also very interested and acquired objects in the same way, as did his wife Henrietta, who went on a 7-month tour of the Madras with an entourage of about 700 people and 15 elephants, collecting huge amounts of botanical and geological specimens as well as objects.
The collection of over 300 items of Indian and Far Eastern origin consists of only the best objects of the time and includes weapons, textiles, and ornamental silver.
Is what's known as a pan set, was used for mixing spices and ceremonial use when eating.
The ivory chessmen were collected probably by Robert Clive. They appear in a list of 1775. And it seems at that time there were some pieces already missing. So we are missing the principal figures, the kings and the viziers, who were basically ministers. There were no queens in this set. Interestingly, you would think that they would have enough ivory in India, but in fact some pieces of ivory, not necessarily for these particular pieces, but in some instances the Indians were importing African ivory because it has a much closer grain, much bigger pieces, and also it doesn't yellow in quite the same way that Indian ivory does. The dressing table or desk was probably commissioned by Robert Clive, and what's interesting about this is at this period Indian craftsmen were adapting their techniques to make furniture of European models in response to the demand from Europeans in India. So you frequently find chairs, which didn't exist as a piece of Indian furniture, being made by craftsmen that would normally have produced boxes or other decorative pieces.
In the collection, there is this little tiger head that is part of a throne that belonged to Tipu Sultan. So long after Clive had finished, most of India had sort of become English, inverted commas, but Tipu stood out as a sort of a rebel figure. I think he was a bit of a dictator himself, but he looked good because he fought against the Brits. So when he fell, they took war trophies, if you like, and one of them was his throne. And this throne is sort of a slightly, it's not circular quite, I think it's kind of hexagonal or something, but it has these little finials sticking up, and on the top of them is this tiger head in each one, and one of them is here. When a friend of mine from India came over, he went in there and he was absolutely wowed, because for him in India there isn't a collection like that. So he was seeing his own heritage presented in a large amount, and was very excited about it.
The Clive collection is almost unique in that it survives. It's extremely rare for a collection of the 18th century of this sort of material to be kept together. And it's also very unusual that it should be in Wales. And there's quite a surprise to a lot of visitors who come here. They don't expect to see such a huge collection of Indian artefacts.
This deranged-looking cat is one of the most historically important items in the house. It was bought by Robert Clive.
It is a Roman cat. It's 2nd century AD. But the story behind it is that when Robert Clive was in India, he lived a charmed life. And he one time walked into a tent and a cobra reared up at him. And quite suddenly a cat came in and killed it. Now I think that story is true, however odd it seems.
The cat itself was seen by Clive of India when he was in Rome in 1774, and he wrote to his wife Margaret and said, "I've seen this cat and I've made all kinds of lavish offers on your behalf to secure it," because she was very fond of cats. And he said, "To date I haven't been successful, but I'm going to leave it with my agent to be sure to secure the cat for you." And he was successful, and so the cat came into the collection when his son married into the Herbert family.
As the 20th century dawned, the man who was to bequeath Powys Castle to the National Trust inherited the estate. That man was George Charles Herbert, 4th Earl of Powys.
Well, George Powys was the sort of long-reigning one. He sort of went from the 1890s to 1950s, so he lasted a very long time. He married a lady called Violet. She was a very strong and determined lady. Her combination with him, I think, had quite an impact on what happened here. The castle was completely redone in about 1905. The money spent, curiously, meant that I think the estate dwindled. And what I came into was quite a small little world, but what they had then was almost like a little empire in the area. And so there was a lot of money spare and a lot of high living, I suspect.